The air inside the main hall of justice was cold, heavy with the scent of old paper and polished wood. Sunlight struggled through the tall arched windows, failing to warm the cavernous space. Marble columns, like ancient, unfeeling sentinels, rose to a ceiling so high it seemed to swallow sound, leaving only an oppressive silence punctuated by the monotonous drone of the clerk's voice. It was a place built to project power and permanence, a temple to the law where human emotion felt like an intrusion. In the gallery, a small island of warmth existed in the vast, frigid sea of procedure. A mother held her young daughter, their forms a single silhouette of shared grief. They were a stark reminder of the lives hanging in the balance, a fragile pocket of love in a room designed for the cold, impersonal machinery of judgment. Seated at the defendant's table, Michael Sullivan looked like a man already worn away by the system. The orange inmate jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, a stark and humiliating uniform that had replaced the work clothes of an honest construction worker. Dark circles were etched beneath his eyes, a testament to sleepless nights spent in a jail cell, but within those tired eyes, a flicker of dignity refused to be extinguished. His expression was not one of anger or even fear for himself, but of a profound, soul-crushing sadness. It was the look of a man who had resigned himself to his fate, accepting the world's unjust verdict. He watched the proceedings with a quiet stillness, his only concern radiating towards the gallery, where the two people who were his entire world were being forced to witness his final condemnation. His gaze kept drifting back to them, to his wife Sarah, and their 10-year-old daughter, Lily. Sarah's face was pale, her knuckles white as she gripped Lily's shoulder. And Lily, so small in the imposing courtroom, clutched a small, worn wooden bird in her hand, a trinket he had carved for her years ago. Her large brown eyes, too mature for her age, were fixed on him, filled with a desperate, unwavering belief that defied the cold reality of the room. This was the true source of his agony. The shame and the prison sentence were burdens he could bear. But the helplessness of not being able to shield his daughter from this public disgrace, from the whispers and stares that would follow her, was a torment beyond measure. He was her hero, and he was failing to protect her from the very world he had taught her to trust. The prosecutor, District Attorney Eleanor Vance, stood and delivered her final remarks with a chilling lack of emotion, her words painting Michael as a menace to the society he had always worked to build. Each phrase was a carefully crafted stone, adding to the wall being built around his life. The judge, a man whose face seemed carved from the same impassive marble as the columns around him, listened without expression. He then lifted his gavel. The sound it made as it struck the wooden block was not loud, but it echoed through the silent courtroom with the finality of a closing tomb. "On the charge of—" the judge began, his voice a dispassionate baritone that carried the weight of absolute authority. At that moment, as the words that would officially shatter their lives began to form, Sarah's quiet sob was the only sound that broke the spell of institutional power. The air inside the main hall of justice was cold, heavy with the scent of old paper and polished wood. Sunlight struggled through the tall, arched windows, failing to warm the cavernous space. Marble columns, like ancient, unfeeling sentinels, rose to a ceiling so high it seemed to swallow sound, leaving only an oppressive silence punctuated by the monotonous drone of the clerk's voice. It was a place built to project power and permanence, a temple to the law where human emotion felt like an intrusion. In the gallery, a small island of warmth existed in the vast, frigid sea of procedure. A mother held her young daughter, their forms a single silhouette of shared grief. They were a stark reminder of the lives hanging in the balance, a fragile pocket of love in a room designed for the cold, impersonal machinery of judgment. Seated at the defendant's table, Michael Sullivan looked like a man already worn away by the system. The orange inmate jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, a stark and humiliating uniform that had replaced the work clothes of an honest construction worker. Dark circles were etched beneath his eyes, a testament to sleepless nights spent in a jail cell. But within those tired eyes, a flicker of dignity refused to be extinguished. His expression was not one of anger or even fear for himself, but of a profound, soul-crushing sadness. It was the look of a man who had resigned himself to his fate, accepting the world's unjust verdict. He watched the proceedings with a quiet stillness, his only concern radiating towards the gallery, where the two people who were his entire world were being forced to witness his final condemnation. His gaze kept drifting back to them, to his wife Sarah and their 10-year-old daughter, Lily. Sarah's face was pale, her knuckles white as she gripped Lily's shoulder, and Lily, so small in the imposing courtroom, clutched a small, worn wooden bird in her hand, a trinket he had carved for her years ago. Her large brown eyes, too mature for her age, were fixed on him, filled with a desperate, unwavering belief that defied the cold reality of the room. This was the true source of his agony. The shame and the prison sentence were burdens he could bear, but the helplessness of not being able to shield his daughter from this public disgrace, from the whispers and stares that would follow her, was a torment beyond measure. He was her hero, and he was failing to protect her from the very world he had taught her to trust. The prosecutor, District Attorney Eleanor Vance, stood and delivered her final remarks with a chilling lack of emotion, her words painting Michael as a menace to the society he had always worked to build. Each phrase was a carefully crafted stone, adding to the wall being built around his life. The judge, a man whose face seemed carved from the same impassive marble as the columns around him, listened without expression. He then lifted his gavel. The sound it made as it struck the wooden block was not loud, but it echoed through the silent courtroom with the finality of a closing tomb. "On the charge of," the judge began, his voice a dispassionate baritone that carried the weight of absolute authority. At that moment, as the words that would officially shatter their lives began to form, Sarah's quiet sob was the only sound that broke the spell of institutional power. Back in their small apartment, the silence was a constant, suffocating presence. Every creak of the floorboards echoed the emptiness left by Michael's absence. For Lily, the world had shrunk to these few rooms, a place where memories were both a comfort and a torment. She would often sit in her father's favorite armchair, inhaling the faint, lingering scent of sawdust and coffee that clung to the worn fabric. She refused to believe the terrible things people whispered about him. The man who taught her how to tie her shoes, who patiently showed her how to carve a bird from a block of wood, could not be the monster the news described. Her faith was a small, fierce flame in the encroaching darkness, a stubborn belief that the world had made a terrible mistake, and she was the only one who remembered the truth. One rainy afternoon, driven by a desperate need to feel close to him, Lily pulled an old cardboard box from the top of her mother's closet. It was filled with her dad's odds and ends, faded photographs, a few well-worn paperbacks, and a tangle of old chargers. Her fingers brushed against something hard and metallic at the bottom. It was an old cell phone, a bulky model from years ago with a cracked screen. It was heavy in her small hands, a relic from a time before their lives had fractured. A powerful intuition seized her, a feeling that this forgotten object held a key. She knew, with the unshakable certainty of a child's heart, that she had to make it work. It felt less like a choice and more like a calling, a whisper from the past she couldn't ignore. She took the phone to the teenager who lived down the hall, a boy named Alex, who was always tinkering with electronics. He looked at the ancient device with a skeptical smile, but agreed to help, moved by the desperate plea in her eyes. After trying several old chargers from his own collection of electronic fossils, one finally fit. They waited, the silence in his cluttered room thick with anticipation. Then, miraculously, the screen flickered to life, bathing their faces in a pale blue glow. Lily's heart leapt. She scrolled through the photo gallery with trembling fingers, each image a painful, beautiful reminder of their life before. There was her dad at her birthday party. His face lit up with a joyful grin. There he was, holding her as a baby. He was here, on this screen, whole and happy. Tucked away in a miscellaneous folder, she found a single video file. Its name was just a string of numbers, the date of a seemingly ordinary day over a year ago. She tapped it, but an error message popped up. File corrupted. A wave of frustration washed over her. It was so close, yet so far. Alex, intrigued by the challenge, spent the next hour running a recovery program. Lily watched the progress bar crawl across the screen, each percentage point a tiny victory against the digital decay. She didn't know what was on it, but her gut screamed that it was important. The world had built its case on lies and whispers, and she felt this small, broken file held a piece of the truth, a truth that everyone else had forgotten or deliberately buried. Suddenly, the video sputtered to life. The footage was shaky and chaotic, filmed from inside a car at night. The only light came from the dashboard and the terrifying, flickering orange glow of a fire ahead. The audio was a mess of wind, static, and the distant wail of a siren. On the screen, she saw the back of her father's head as he drove. He slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt just yards from a horrific crash. Another vehicle was engulfed in flames. The metal twisted into an unrecognizable shape. For a moment, the camera just sat there, recording the horrifying spectacle. Lily's breath caught in her throat, her mind struggling to process the violent scene unfolding on the tiny screen. She was watching a nightmare, and her father was right in the middle of it. The car door opened, and her father, Michael, was suddenly in the frame, running directly toward the inferno. There was no hesitation, no fear in his movements, only a raw, instinctual drive to help. He wrenched the passenger door of the burning car open and leaned inside, disappearing into the smoke and flames. A moment later, he emerged, dragging an unconscious woman away from the wreckage. He laid her gently on the side of the road just as the car exploded in a terrifying fireball that lit up the night sky. The phone, seemingly dropped on the dashboard, recorded it all. Lily stared, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. This was her father, not a criminal, a hero. It's hard to watch something like this and not feel compelled to share it. Subscribing to our channel helps us bring more hidden truths like this one to light. She replayed the clip over and over, her finger pausing the video at the exact moment her father pulled the woman into the faint light. The woman's face was smudged with soot, but her features were distinct. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, washed over Lily. She knew that face. She had seen it in the local newspaper and on television, standing beside her husband at charity events. It was Judge Miller's wife, the man who held her father's life in his hands. The man whose gavel was about to seal their family's fate was married to the woman her father had saved. The pieces didn't just fall into place. They crashed together with a sickening certainty. This wasn't a mistake. It was a cover-up. Someone had gone to great lengths to bury this story, and they had used her father as the scapegoat. The shock quickly gave way to a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. Hope, fierce and powerful, flooded every part of her being. This video changed everything. It was the truth, undeniable and explosive. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, because she now understood she was up against people who were powerful enough to imprison an innocent man. But her love for her father was a much stronger force. For weeks, she had been a helpless little girl, watching her world crumble. Now, she had a weapon. Her mission was no longer a vague hope, it was a concrete objective. She had to get this phone to the courthouse and show everyone, especially Judge Miller, who Michael Sullivan really was. It's in moments like these you realize how much courage one person can have, and if you feel that too, please consider subscribing to support stories of incredible strength. Without a second thought, she grabbed the phone and bolted from Alex's apartment, whispering a hurried thank you. She didn't stop to find her mother, who was lost in a fog of grief and medication, unable to fight. This was a battle Lily had to wage on her own. She flew down the apartment building's stairs and burst out into the cold afternoon air. The courthouse was miles away, on the other side of town. She ran, her small legs pumping furiously on the cracked pavement. The city was a blur of indifferent faces, honking cars and grey buildings. Each breath was a sharp pain in her chest, but she didn't slow down. She was running not just for her father's freedom, but for his honor, for the hero she always knew he was. As she ran, faces from her neighborhood swam in her vision. Mrs. Gable from next door, who used to give her cookies, now turned her head away when she saw her. The kids at school, who whispered "Jailbird's daughter" behind her back, their taunts echoing in her ears. The world had passed its judgment long before the trial began, branding her and her mother with a shame that wasn't theirs to bear. These slights, which had once felt like tiny paper cuts, now fueled a righteous fire within her. They were all wrong. The entire world was wrong about her dad. This phone, clutched tightly in her sweating hand, was not just evidence, it was a shield against their scorn and a sword to cut through their lies. Finally, the courthouse came into view. It was even more intimidating from the outside, a colossal fortress of granite and marble. Its massive columns seemed to hold up the heavy grey sky, and the long flight of stone steps looked like a mountain she had to climb. This was the building that had stolen her father, a place of cold rules and colder hearts. To a 10-year-old girl in a worn-out coat, it felt like a monster's lair. She paused at the bottom of the steps, her small frame dwarfed by the sheer scale of the institution. For a fleeting moment, doubt crept in. Who was she, a little girl with a broken phone, to challenge this immense power? The weight of what she was about to do settled on her shoulders. She took a deep, shaky breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. The image of her father's defeated face in the courtroom flashed in her mind, followed by the image of his determined face in the firelight of the video. The two Michaels, the victim and the hero, merged into one, and her resolve hardened like steel. This was for him. She tightened her grip on the phone, the device now feeling less like a piece of technology and more like an extension of her own heart. With her head held high, she began to climb the steps, one by one, each footfall a small act of defiance against the silent, imposing facade of the law. She pushed open the impossibly heavy bronze doors and stepped into the cold, quiet hall of justice, ready to make them listen. The heavy doors groaned open, and Lily burst into the courtroom. A small whirlwind of desperation against the room's cold stillness. "Stop!" she cried, her voice high and clear, cutting through the judge's sentencing pronouncement like a shard of glass. Every head turned. She stood there, chest heaving from her run, clutching the old cell phone in her hand as if it were a holy relic. "He didn't do it. My dad is innocent, and I have proof." A wave of murmurs swept through the gallery. District Attorney Vance shot to her feet, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Your Honor, this is an absurd disruption. I demand this child be removed immediately." Two bailiffs began to move towards Lily, their large frames casting long shadows over her small figure, but she didn't flinch, her eyes locked on the man on the bench. Judge Miller stared down from his elevated seat, his expression unreadable. He saw the panicked, almost vicious urgency in his district attorney's eyes, and then he saw the fierce, unyielding truth burning in the 10-year-old girl's face. For a man who had built his entire career on procedure and precedent, this was a moment of profound internal conflict. The rules dictated he remove her, but something in her desperate plea, in the raw, unfiltered honesty of a child fighting for her father, broke through his decades of judicial detachment. He raised a hand, stopping the bailiffs in their tracks. "Objection overruled. Ms. Vance," he stated, his voice ringing with an uncharacteristic authority that silenced the room. "The court will see this evidence. Bailiff, please assist the young lady." The courtroom held its collective breath as the bailiff connected the small, cracked phone to the large monitors meant for presenting evidence. A moment later, the shaky, chaotic footage filled the screens. The night, the fire, the mangled wreck of the car. The entire room watched in stunned silence as the figure of Michael Sullivan ran not away from the danger, but directly into it. A collective gasp echoed through the hall as he pulled an unconscious woman from the flaming vehicle just seconds before it was consumed by a violent explosion. The camera, still recording from the dashboard, captured the moment he laid her gently on the roadside, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. A chilling wave of recognition washed over the room. De Vance grew visibly pale. Judge Miller froze, his knuckles white as he gripped his gavel, staring at the face of his own wife. The video ended, but the images remained, burned into the consciousness of everyone present. The silence that followed was heavier and more profound than any that had come before. Judge Miller slowly rose to his feet, his professional composure completely shattered. He removed his glasses, his hands trembling. He did not address the prosecution, the defense, or the jury. His eyes, filled with a complex storm of shock, gratitude, and immense shame, were locked on Michael Sullivan. "Mr. Sullivan," he began, his voice thick with an emotion that cracked its judicial veneer, "on behalf of the state, and on my own behalf, I ask for your forgiveness. You are not a criminal. You are a hero, and this court owes you your freedom and your honor." He then turned a gaze of cold fury on the prosecutor. "Bailiff, take Miss Vance into custody. This court is adjourned." The final strike of the gavel was not a sentence, but a liberation. As pandemonium erupted, with reporters shouting and bailiffs moving swiftly toward a stunned Eleanor Vance, Michael Sullivan remained seated, his body trembling as the weight of a nightmare finally lifted. The clink of the handcuffs being unlocked was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. Tears of relief, validation, and overwhelming love streamed freely down his face. He barely registered the noise around him. His entire world had narrowed to the small figure running toward him. He fell to his knees, his arms open, and Lily launched herself into his embrace. There, in the center of the cold marble floor, father and daughter held each other. Their quiet sobs of joy, the only verdict that truly mattered, their unbreakable bond finally vindicated in the eyes of the world. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of flashing cameras and reporters camped outside their apartment building. But inside, the Sullivans were slowly piecing their world back together. The silence was no longer suffocating. It was filled with quiet conversations, the sound of Lily's laughter, and the familiar, comforting scent of sawdust as Michael began carving again, not out of distraction, but out of joy. The shame that had clung to them like a shroud was gone, replaced by a quiet pride. Michael was no longer the neighborhood pariah, but a local hero, greeted with warm smiles and respectful nods. For the first time in over a year, they could walk down the street without the weight of false judgment on their shoulders. They were not just a family that had survived, they were a family that had been reborn, their bonds forged even stronger in the crucible of injustice. One evening, they received an unexpected visitor. Former Judge Miller stood at their door, no longer in his imposing robes, but in a simple suit, his face etched with a humility they had never seen in the courtroom. He didn't come with apologies, which had already been made, but with a proposition. The ordeal, he explained, had shattered his faith in the system he had served his entire life, but Lily's courage had given him a new purpose. He was liquidating his assets to establish a foundation, a new kind of innocence project dedicated to providing legal and investigative resources for those wrongfully convicted. He wanted Michael not as a poster child for his cause, but as a co-founder, a guiding voice of someone who had endured the system's worst and emerged with his integrity intact. It was a chance for Michael's suffering to have a meaning far beyond his own vindication. The Sullivan story became a national phenomenon, a powerful testament to the idea that truth can prevail against insurmountable odds. It sparked a nationwide conversation about judicial accountability and the fallibility of the very institutions designed to protect the innocent. The family received a substantial settlement from the state, but they chose to remain in their small apartment, finding comfort in the life they had fought so hard to reclaim. Michael dedicated his time to the new foundation, his quiet strength and first-hand experience providing invaluable insight and hope to other families trapped in similar nightmares. Their journey was a powerful reminder of how a single voice, fueled by love, can ignite a movement. If their story has moved you, please subscribe, because your support allows us to continue sharing accounts of courage that can truly change the world. 10 years later, in a university auditorium filled with aspiring lawyers, a confident young woman stood at the podium. It was Lily, her large brown eyes now filled not with premature sadness, but with a fierce intelligence and unwavering resolve. In the front row, 2 men sat side by side, their faces beaming with pride. Her father, Michael, and their dear friend, a former Judge Miller. She spoke of systemic failures and the need for compassionate justice, her voice ringing with the clarity of someone who had lived her subject matter. Justice is not found in the cold letter of the law, she concluded, her gaze finding her father's in the crowd. It is forged in the heart. It is built on the courage to speak truth to power, proving that sometimes the greatest strength can be found in the smallest act of defiance.